Well, we're here in Edinburgh, and we are standing in the sunshine on a chilly day. And Maria, can you tell us where we are? Better than I, from the United States. I have no idea where we are.
We are on Calton Hill, and this is in the city of Edinburgh, which is the second best city in Scotland.
Oh, wow. Wait, so Glasgow is the first? Okay, wow. Wow, there's some other cities that have been left out, but okay, and Iain is here. Hello. Iain. Tessa is here. Christie is here. Colin is here. Laynie is here, and Jane is here. We're honored to be talking about Callie Gardner's poem called Leaf Person, and our Scottish poetry friends are going to read this collaboratively in a way, starting with Iain, in a way that they'll have to figure it out as they go along.
Leaf Person by Callie Gardner. 1. Walking in the woods, I read a leaf person, a Jenny Hanover of the forest floor, their mouth a ripped up rictus of matter or paper, whichever worsens the house price worser, when we all know bay leaves, they leave beliefs. The text offers you a tissue, but it's merely a sad old approximation, a minimum in this time.
Unconscious, I swam into the kettle of the mind's eye, a flotsam, jetsam harp on about the keynote squeaker, whose pause in questioning clasped a slim vibration, a resonant phrase whose meaning tended to be mistaken. Narrowwood shot through the city in vain attempts to judge themselves the heart of the matter. And I felt like I knew, although this was often assumed, that they offered arcane transport from the arrived world where we lay stupefied, law-kissed, milk-drunk, and awaiting the Christ child to come with my parcel. Sorry, we missed you.
Said the little fragment or ostracon wedged into the rope hole in the floor of the treehouse. Worse than a lack of awareness, it belies a fatal disconnection from the threads that web together the world under the moon, motionable and peripatetic by nurture, but guarded as a consequence of the merry-go-town or upland down. Find the sun just by putting your curious eye to the knot-hole and breathing in, as if to prepare to whistle.
You only need a little height and pointed north for roof and hilltops to typeset themselves so legibly, how near, how apart they seem, their butch solemnity an extensive revelation. As I stood under the spreading tree, it rang, temple-domed with noiseless paeans, the song of souls, and I understood why they believed hearts were souls so quickly, strenuously did the ache harry, my chest bones held by morbid recognition. Parks are fiddle, cities are smut, grey ambivalence towards the long atrocity still chokes each recreation. Queens, kings, lords and merchants, dedicated ground, battle-soaked, brittle-tighted, ironclad, signposted. In my dream,
I open my pocket knife, and then, upon waking, fold it up again. Where do dreams of bleeding come from when there's no blood left to let? It's like tying a silk ribbon around a broken tree branch, or maybe like burning sacred wood to get rid of a bad smell. You can read leaves, even if you cannot speak them. Needle's a kind of leaf, although somehow it never seems vertebral enough. Trees are a pyramid scheme. Anyway, debt-free to the earth. I am in Arden too, said Death. What condition led you here? What's your tendency? When I was out of doors, I was in a better place, but masked revellers must be content. It turned out the angry men were full of goose feathers and loose straw and could be easily dispatched.
3. One wrapped in mould and bandages, like cheese never forgave those who extracted their vocabulary with a hook, kept it in a canopic jar, leaving them sullen on the slab until the resurrection, no leaves remaining, to be overturned in the interim. It's about being a belief person. Get thee to a mummery, carry on the show, more content, more argument, another verso, caught between pages, trapped in the ecosystem, yet somehow can't make like a tree and leaf.
The bookish, natural sun, desiring a return to form, a geometric unravelling, each angle another sacred revelation. The shadows of praying hands like ink on floorboards, soaking into fibrous channels, minor rivers, changing their names as their careers advance, watering a clutch of lonely ogham scratches in the margin of the sky. A text unweaves in reverse, each letter made of leaves, each leaf holding a library in each cell, which is where the monks worked, patiently at their washing of skins and their illuminations.
Much later, turning cards over in anonymous fascicles, characters unspool. A long dead ox leaves bones across the top of the page. We wait for the rain to dry, the aisles of its attention drowning in day air. With a start, I recognise some character I know in the leaf face, reversed, as elsewhere in the building a bell is heard to ring.
Iain, what do you think Callie Gardner meant when they described a leaf person? What's a leaf person?
The sense I was getting is there's kind of any subject, any person, anything we call a person is this phantom construction that exists and decays and may already be decayed. Like there's this sort of animation of a subject, and the Jenny Hanover that comes up in the second line, we looked it up earlier, it's like this weird thing that people used to make with dried fish, sort of into like weird people, God knows what was going on, but like where does it come up, like the mummery, the pun, very Veronica Forrest Thompson pun,
get thee to a mummery.
I just find there's something extraordinary about where this voice seems like it's located before the subject comes into focus, like before the body is animated and after the body is animated, but still is speaking somehow.
Can we riff together, any of us, all of us, on connotations of leaf? Iain suggested the one that comes to mind first, of course, which is the idea of the leaf of a tree that then, of course, can fall and decay and cause a circle of nature. But there are many others. Colin, any other connotations?
Yeah, obviously there's like a leaf as a page of a book as well. But also I think in that title, a leaf person, and given the way that belief functions in this text and kind of repeats, and I almost think of a leaf as a kind of aversion to belief, like a kind of anti-belief maybe.
Belief as in believe?
Yeah.
Yes, and of course there's a reference, they have a phrase here toward the end, a belief person, so it's very explicit. Jane, can we talk more about leaves?
Yeah, in the sense of law-kissed leaves, I can't help thinking this is a a very subterranean version of Apollo and Daphne, and it's about a flight from being in human form to escape, in mythological terms, to escape rape, to escape destruction, and poor Daphne has to be transformed into a tree to avoid the ravages of sexual predatoriness of Apollo, the god. And then he wears the leaves as his crown, as his kind of symbol of poetry and victory and patriarchal kind of overbearing in so many kind of circles of life, not just poetic. But I see this kind of flight into the leaf as being a kind of classical trope, and that finding between human and leaf is, you see many Renaissance paintings of Daphne sprouting leaves about to turn into a tree. So I see a kind of retreat from the imposition of sort of patriarchal binaries. And
we have a long poem here, and so it almost defies in our unit of, a 20 or 30 minute conversation that's being filmed. It seems to suggest that our mode right here should be not to do close reading. However, it's a very leafy, dense poem. So I wondered if you would be willing to read the first stanza, and while you're reading it, I'll ask Christie and Tessa to get ready to start kind of giving us a close reading of what's going on there, and then we can ask others to join.
1. Walking in the woods, I read a leaf person, a Jenny Hanover of the forest floor, their mouth a ripped up rictus of matter or paper, whichever worsens the house price worser. When we all know bay leaves, they leave beliefs. The text offers you a tissue, but it's merely a sad old approximation, a minimum in this time.
So Tess, it's kind of it's the beginning of a long poem that maybe in a conventional sense you think, oh, this is a nature poem, we have the speaker walking in the woods. But then what happens? What's going on?
Yeah, I love the bit where it says the text offers you a tissue. There's something very thin, very fine, very transparent, very transient. And I think what I've always loved about Callie's poems is that I always have this sense that the poem is very close somehow to the poet, if that makes sense. I think sometimes when you read a poem, you're reading the poem. But I always find with Callie's that they're kind of there. You're sort of in that. There's that kind of very thin tissue layer between the poet and the poem. When I'm reading this poem, I always feel Callie having these thoughts, and that they've just reached the page, and that we're sort of meeting them as they're. Does this make sense? They're just kind of there. They're and this leafness, the leaf falling off the tree, and here is the leaf just fallen off the tree, and we're meeting it at this moment of it being written somehow.
Oh, that's marvelous.
Yeah.
Christie, you want to take it from there on this stanza?
Yeah, I mean, I love the way the language is almost like kind of disintegrating, like all the leaves in Scotland at this time of year, like whichever worsens the house price worser. It's not, it's doing something that we don't do when we're selling houses, hopefully, and it's got this density. It's got this density that is like a forest.
Yeah.
And the other thing I wanted to pick up was a minimum in this time. Just struck me that a minimum is a musical beat, and that so the minimum and the time. So it's a minimum in this time is just so playful.
Oh, lovely. Laynie, Colin, and then Iain. I'm just going to set us in a direction, but you can go anywhere you want, of course. Christie was talking about the density, and what we have here that's marvelous is a poem that almost predicts its disintegration, stanza by stanza, and so density, which speaks to presence and thickness and reality and something that's going to last, and then disintegration, which is almost a self-mourning, right? So the things are happening at the same time. We're disappearing, but we're also contributing to the density. So can we deal with that paradox? And it's, I guess, hard not to read the poem thinking about a poet who has left us.
Yeah.
So I invite you to do that if you like. Maybe we'll start with Colin and then Laynie.
Sure. So yeah, as you beautifully put it there, the poem sort of opens up, and there are these kind of pockmarks that kind of develop in the poem as it continues towards the end, and they're almost like there's this beautiful line in the poem about looking through a knot hole, and I feel like the poem develops its own kind of knot holes as if it's a rug that's kind of disintegrating, as you've said. But even here in the first stanza, I think that kind of sense of spatiality gets opened up by phrases like bay leaves, they leave beliefs, where almost because of that wordplay between bay leaves and beliefs, we also hear the word bailiff, especially given the house price worser. And again, with worser, I think we also hear the word worker. And there are these kind of really complex kind of associative logics open up spaces even within this kind of denser part of the beginning of the poem.
Thank you.
Amazing.
Laynie?
Both Christie and Colin spoke about the sound and the associative belief, the associative movement of the language, and I really feel it in my body hearing this poem read aloud. Like every single line is musically scored, and I can move with it, and that's one journey I take with a poem. And another one, it seems like that knot hole. I'm thinking of the beginning of the second stanza. I swam into the kettle of the mind's eye. It seems like one journey that we're taking is from looking at the forest floor and the leaf to ingesting something, a plant substance, and then there's a shift of consciousness, this intelligence of the leaf, this intelligence of the more than human person. So I'm also reading the leaf person as, why do we separate person from leaf? We are ephemeral just like the leaf, and the intelligence of the plants is really central to the poem.
Great. Iain?
I think one of the things that the poem does too is it kind of captures the rituals around death as well. As well as mummery, we've got canopic jars, which is where the ancient Egyptians stored the organs from the body, and the washing of skins and monks. There's all this kind of ritual that helps us to deal with those processes as well. And I think, just thinking about what Laynie just said as well, Callie was a poet of compost as well. They had this line that riffed on Glasgow's sort of slogan, "Let Glasgow flourish." In their poem, naturally it is not. It became "Let Glasgow compost." So that's kind of something that we're seeing. And it makes me think of this poems like D.H. Lawrence's poem, the one about death, where he sails off and behold my ship of death or something, for you will build it, and it's like sort of the poem that takes you through the process into the next stage. Those poems of launching off into dispersal and renewal.
Yeah. This poem ends. Let's just say we were teaching students, and they assume that contemporary poetry is going to be harder to read and more experimental, whatever those words mean, than the poem from the 17th century or the 18th century. But the final lines, which are elegiac, tap into a tradition of poetry. The bell tolling at the end, of course. But what it does is it tolls sort of off-site, off-screen, off-stage, so that the speaker recognizes themselves in the leaf, as if the leaf were a mirror reversing the face, as elsewhere, as at the same time, or in the same way that the bell is tolling somewhere outside the poem. I mean, I didn't know Callie, and I'm feeling the power of that.
And there's Dickinson too, right? I heard a fly buzz while I died.
Exactly.
She's there.
Right.
Yeah,
So they seem to be understanding the death is not far away. So I would invite our Scottish poetry friends to say something as final thoughts on why people should read Callie Gardner and what Callie meant to the scene here and whatever else you would like to say. Maybe we'll start with Jane.
I can't begin to encapsulate what Callie meant, but if you read this poem, you'll get a sense of what it means to enter any poem like an animal into a wood, and you're listening for the sounds that you're making as much as for the sounds that the poem and the wood are making. And this concept, Callie was hoping to do a postdoctoral study of catachresis, miscategorization, the miscategorization. And decisions you're having to make in the poem already on the first line, we have to think, is it I read a leaf person or is it I read a leaf person? And then you've still got that in your mind when you get down to the next stanza, I swam. Oh, that's past tense. Should I go back, retrace my steps and rethink read as read? And then when we get to the end, again, it's in the present. So suddenly, what is the time of this poem? And are all the actions in the same time zone? So I think it's this beautiful self-conscious poetry that knows you are going to have to make decisions as a reader, and it's like they've set little games for you to play within the syllabic play, within the word play, and it's not going to scare you by that. You can't be wrong about that. It's kind of set this little web for you to kind of find things, and the poem will keep on giving and giving because of that. I could go on, but I would love to hear what Colin has to say.
Sure. I totally agree with what Jane said, and I think Callie's work is like this inhabitation of language. So a text unweaves in reverse, each letter made of leaves, each leaf hoarding a library in each cell, which is where the monks worked patiently at their washing of skins and their illuminations. And in those lines, which are on the last sort of section of the poem, there's this, it's like you're walking into what a book might be, what language is, what cells are, what we're made up of, as if, and it gives you the sense that we're all made up of language, and sort of emphasizes the ways in which, because our cells are in a sense made up of language, we're, the ways in which we relate to language and through language are ultimately the ways in which we live.
Christie?
Yeah, thank you both, and thank you everybody. I mean, it's the language is so richly woven in the relationship between sound and the body, and sound and meaning is so rewarding, and like Jane said, you could just read it and read it, and you should.
Tessa?
Yeah, I mean the question about why to read Callie, I think for me, I've always felt Callie kind of taught me to really allow myself to really care about poetry. I think sometimes I can be quite a bad poet, and I kind of try to resist poetry quite a lot of the time. Whereas with Callie, you just, you like Colin said, you're kind of led into the wood, and then you're there, you're breathing it. All this space for the breath, for the words, and so you don't have time to sort of go, I'm going to resist poetry. Hey, look at me. You're in there, and it's so careful, and it's so caring, and it's so compassionate with. Just being alive, being a writer in the world with house prices and death. You're drawn into life, I think, yeah.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say how nice it is to be able to discuss Callie's work in this kind of close reading detail, because Callie was one of my favourite and is one of my favourite close readers. They have many blogs online you can read where they would kind of go through a poem, and it really opens up the ways, like they had this encyclopedic imagination, and were such a great teacher, and I was lucky enough to see them in different contexts, see them kind of as running a little workshop at the Queer Bookshop in Glasgow, and just teaching like prosody to people that had never really even read poetry before, and making an amphibrach make sense and all this kind of thing. And they were like such a great scholar poet with a wicked sense of humour, all the catechisms, and Keynote Squeaker is my favourites. But yeah, I think like aside of Callie, like their sense of humour is so important to how I read the work, and how I kind of love the way that they have a close reading that's called that sort of starts. The title is This Charming Pan, and I just love how much they love a pun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about a conversation I had with Laynie about the way that we're getting past this point now where people have to be classed as either poets or academics, and I feel like we talked about that yesterday when we talked about Veronica Forrest Thompson, about people thinking that she had to be good at one and less good at the other or something, and I feel with Callie there was a holisticness about the way they approached all of their work in writing and reading and scholarship and teaching and editing and publishing, and I think that they did a huge amount for scenes here and communities that were geographically dispersed around transness and queerness and class solidarity, and were an active anti-racist campaigner. In a way that's all by the bias to why we should read the work, but we definitely should read the work, and I don't want anyone to feel like we have to read it as some kind of favour for all the good work that they did. It's because the work in itself deserves the attention that Callie would have been too modest to spend time basking in their life, and I hope that people do spend time for centuries with this work as we all pass through our different stages of being leaf people and then passing out of them.
Oh, that's lovely. That sounded like the end of the discussion, but I think I want to just put a coda in and invite everybody to find a phrase from this poem, and without sequencing, just from Jane down to the end, just say the phrase, and it will put into the leafiness of the poem into the memory of anybody watching this film. All right, so Jane, you're first, and you haven't had much of a chance to find one, but
You just want one phrase? Okay, right, I'm going to go meta here. A resonant phrase.
The bookish natural sun desiring.
Leaves each leaf hoarding a library.
Anyway, free debt to the earth.
The angry men were full of goose feathers and loose straw, and could easily be dispatched.
Trees are a pyramid scheme anyway.
Quickly, strenuously did.
as elsewhere in the building, a bell is heard to ring. Thank you all.